My name is Eleanor Wilson. I'm 68 years old, and my daughter and her husband abandoned me at a desolate mountain rest stop to teach me a lesson about what family really means. The real lesson, however, came when they found out that the 68-year-old burden they'd discarded still held the deed to their precious home. It's a long story, but it's one I feel I need to tell. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. It's a little past noon here in sunny Arizona. Let me know your city and what time it is there in the comments below. It feels good to know we're all connected, no matter the distance. The Arizona sun was a familiar, comforting weight on my skin as I sat on my small, tiled patio, a tall glass of iced tea sweating onto the black wrought iron table beside me. The sweet, heady scent of the bougainvillea I'd babied for years hung heavy in the air. It was my sanctuary, this little corner of the world I'd built in a quiet retirement community in Tucson. It was peaceful, orderly, everything my life with my daughter, Melissa, was not. In my hand, my phone felt cool and solid, a stark contrast to the tremor of anxiety in my chest. "Everything is in order, Eleanor," my lawyer's voice, calm and professional, came through the speaker. Davis had been my lawyer for 20 years, ever since my husband, Robert, had passed. He'd handled the will, the inheritance, and the messy sale of our old family home. He was more than a lawyer. He was a bastion of reason in a world that often lacked it. The lien is properly filed against the property on Aspen Drive in Portland. As we discussed, this means they cannot sell, refinance, or otherwise dispose of the home without satisfying the $75,000 debt to you first. It's ironclad. "Thank you, Davis," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I looked out at the distant, hazy mountains. "I appreciate you being so thorough. You know, Robert always said that love needs to be backed by clarity. Otherwise, it just becomes a mess." Davis chuckled softly, a dry, rustling sound. "Robert was a wise man, and you've always been a wise woman, Eleanor. I just hope, for your sake, that you never have to use this." "I hope so too," I lied, the falsehood a bitter taste on my tongue. The truth was, a part of me already knew I would have to use it. The hope I harbored was no longer for a happy resolution, but for the strength to see my painful plan through to the end. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, my thumb hovering over the screen. The wallpaper was a photo of my grandchildren, 11-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Noah, taken last Christmas. They were beaming, their faces alight with innocent joy. They were the reason for all of this, for the sleepless nights, for the liquidation of a significant chunk of my retirement savings, and for the cold, hard strategy that was now taking root in my heart. My phone buzzed again almost immediately, as if on cue. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep, fortifying breath, and composed my facies into a mask of gentle, maternal warmth. I answered on the third ring. "Melissa, honey, I was just thinking about you." "Hi, Mom. I'm so glad I caught you. Paul and I were talking and, well, we have an idea." I took a slow sip of my tea, the ice cubes clinking musically against the glass. "Oh, what's that, dear?" "We know things have been a little tense since you visited last month, and we feel just awful about it. We want to make it up to you. We were thinking, why don't you fly up here next week? We'll take a family road trip, just the 5 of us up to Mount Rainier. It'll be beautiful. A real chance to reconnect, you know? For the kids, too. They miss their grandma." My visit. She made it sound so casual, so innocuous. She conveniently failed to mention that my visit had been a surprise, one I'd made after weeks of vague, worrying phone calls from her. I'd arrived on their doorstep to find not a family in crisis, but one thriving on my money. The brand new luxury SUV in their driveway, the gleaming, freshly renovated gourmet kitchen. These were not the purchases of a family on the brink of homelessness because my son-in-law, Paul, had supposedly lost his high-paying job. That was the lie that had started it all. A lie I had confirmed was just that. A quick, discreet call to an old friend who still worked at Paul's engineering firm revealed the truth. Paul hadn't been laid off. He'd recently received a significant promotion and a hefty raise. His salary was higher than it had ever been. The $75,000 I'd given them, the money I'd pulled from accounts meant to secure my own old age, hadn't been to save their home. It had been to fund their greed. The tense atmosphere she mentioned was the result of my quiet, pointed questions and their clumsy, insulting lies. And this trip? This wasn't an olive branch. It was something else. I didn't know the specifics of their plan, but I knew it wasn't for my benefit. Perhaps they planned to emotionally manipulate me into forgiving the loan. Perhaps it was something worse. But it didn't matter, because I needed this. I needed one final, irrefutable piece of evidence. I needed to document their intentions in their own words before I brought the hammer down. Their plan was a trap for me, but it was also the perfect stage for my own. "Oh, Melissa, that sounds wonderful," I cooed, injecting a note of frail, hopeful excitement into my voice. "Truly wonderful. I'd love that more than anything. A chance to be with my grandbabies is a gift." "Great," she chirped, audibly relieved that I had taken the bait so easily. Her relief was another layer of proof. "I'll book the ticket. We'll pick you up from the airport. Oh, Mom, it's gonna be so good to have you. We've missed you." "I've missed you too, sweetie," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We hung up, and the oppressive silence of my patio returned, broken only by the buzzing of a nearby hummingbird. I looked at the smiling faces of Emma and Noah on my phone. They were the only reason I was walking into this. Not for Melissa, a daughter I was beginning to realize I no longer knew. Not for Paul, a man I had never truly liked, but for the two innocent children caught in the web of their parents' deceit. I had to protect their future, their college funds, their very character, even if it meant enduring one last painful performance. I had to know just how far they were willing to go. And as I sat there, under the warm Tucson sun that suddenly felt cold, I steeled myself for the days ahead. I was no longer just a loving mother and doting grandmother. I was a woman on a mission, walking willingly into the lion's den, not as a lamb to the slaughter, but as the hunter, armed with a lawyer's contract and a broken heart. The air inside the luxury SUV was thick with a tension you could cut with a knife, a strange mixture of cloying pine air freshener and unspoken resentment. For the past 2 hours, we'd been climbing, leaving the sunny plains behind for the dense, evergreen forests of Washington. The majestic, snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier loomed ever closer, a silent, white giant judging us from above the clouds. Outside, a light, persistent drizzle began to mist the windows, blurring the world into a watercolor of greens and grays, perfectly mirroring the cold gloom that had settled in my heart. Paul was driving, his knuckles white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. He hadn't said more than 10 words to me since picking me up at the airport. Melissa, in the passenger seat, kept up a relentlessly cheerful commentary that fooled no one, least of all the children. "Oh, look, kids, a waterfall! Isn't that pretty? Let's sing a song. How about The Wheels on the Bus?" In the back, wedged between the booster seats of a preternaturally silent Emma and a restless, leg-kicking Nola, I felt like a prisoner on her way to sentencing. My large purse was on my lap, a shield of sorts. Inside, my phone was nestled in a side pocket, its microphone actively recording every word, every sigh, every strained silence. This was my stage. It was time for my performance. Playing the part of a frail, slightly confused old woman, a role they had clearly already cast me in, I leaned forward slightly, my back aching from the stiff seat. "I really is beautiful up here," I said, my voice soft and a little reedy. "I'm so glad we're doing this. It puts my mind at ease, seeing you all so happy and well." Melissa turned, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced. "Of course we're okay, Mom. We told you everything worked out with Paul's job situation." "I know, dear. It's just a mother worries," I said,
letting my voice tremble a bit. It wasn't hard to do. I looked out the window at the towering trees, their branches heavy with rain. That money I sent, it must have been such a relief. I know what it's like to worry about losing your home. Your father and I, after he lost his job at the plant that one year, we almost faced a foreclosure. It's a terrible, frightening feeling. It keeps you up at night. I was weaving in a half-truth, a memory of a difficult time long past to make my concern feel more authentic, to bait the hook. Paul grunted from the driver's seat, a sound of pure dismissal. "It was a big help, Eleanor. We appreciate it." His tone was flat, impatient, as if I were a child asking a tiresome question. "I'm just so happy I could do it," I continued, pressing gently, playing the dotty old fool. "I was a bit worried when I saw the new car, of course, and that beautiful new kitchen. I thought, oh my, they must still be struggling to be spending on things like that. But I'm glad to see I was wrong." The atmosphere in the car instantly dropped 10 degrees. The pretense of a happy family trip evaporated. "Mom, we talked about this," Melissa snapped, her cheerful facade cracking like cheap veneer. "That was from Paul's old bonus, a severance package. We decided we deserved something nice for ourselves and the kids after all the stress." "Of course, dear, of course. I didn't mean to pry," I said, feigning a flustered retreat. I let a few moments of silence pass, filled only by the rhythmic, hypnotic swish of the windshield wipers. The children were unnervingly still. Then I delivered the next line, the one I had rehearsed in my head a dozen times. "It's just that contract the lawyer had me sign, the lien on the house. It all felt so formal, a bit scary, you know? It made me think things were very, very serious." That was the trigger. I had poked the bear. "For God's sake, Mom!" Melissa spun around in her seat, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "Are you ever gonna let that go? It was a piece of paper, a formality. Do you really, honestly think we would let our own mother take our house?" "It was your lawyer's idea, wasn't it?" Paul chimed in, his voice laced with accusation, finally engaged. "That Davis fellow, always sticking his nose into other people's business, probably charges you a fortune for it, too." "He was just being cautious, Paul," I said meekly, shrinking back in my seat. "He works for me, after all. He told me he has to protect my interests, my inheritance from your father." "Protect your interests? From who? Your own family?" Melissa's voice rose, becoming shrill, forgetting the children in the back seat who were now staring with wide, frightened eyes. "You know what the problem is, Mom. You never trusted me. You never trusted us. You sit down there in Arizona on your pile of money from Dad's funeral, judging every little thing we do." The mention of my late husband, a good and honest man who had adored his dada, was a low blow. It took every ounce of my self-control not to let the mask of the dotty old woman slip and reveal the furious, grieving wife beneath. "That's not true, Melissa," I whispered, letting a tear well in my eye. It wasn't entirely fake. Her cruelty still had the power to wound me, to find the weak spots in my armor. "Isn't it? You come up here, unannounced, snooping around, asking questions about our salary, about Paul's promotion that he worked so hard for." She caught herself, her hand flying to her mouth. She had just admitted it, admitted he had a promotion, not a severance. The silence in the car was deafening, more profound than any noise. Paul shot her a furious, panicked look in the rearview mirror. I had it. I had the confirmation on tape. The lie, the resentment, the admission. It was all there, captured in pristine digital clarity. My part in this grim play was over. The car swerved abruptly into a rest area, the tires crunching loudly on the wet gravel. It was a desolate, forgotten spot with a single bleak-looking concrete restroom building and a few moss-covered picnic tables shrouded in the thick, swirling mist. "I need some air," Paul snarled, cutting the engine. He and Melissa got out, slamming their doors with a violence that made the whole car shake. They started arguing, in low, angry tones a few feet away, their words lost to the wind and the rain, but their furious gestures told the whole story. Emma, my sweet, sensitive granddaughter, reached out her small, trembling hand and took mine. She asked, her lower lip quivering, "Are they mad at you, Grandma?" I squeezed her hand, my heart aching for her innocence. "It's just grown-up stuff, sweetie," I whispered, trying to shield her from a truth she was too young to bear. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it had everything to do with her. And in that moment, any lingering flicker of doubt I had about the righteousness of my plan was extinguished. This wasn't just about money or a house anymore. It was about saving these children from the poison of their parents' character. Melissa wrenched open the back door with such force that it shuddered on its hinges. Her face was pale and set, a canvas of cold fury. The drizzle had picked up, plastering strands of her expensive blonde hair to her forehead and cheeks. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me at some indeterminate point in the misty, dripping woods, as if I were already an object she was preparing to discard. "Get out," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of all the fake warmth from her phone call, devoid of any emotion at all. It was the voice of a stranger.
I blinked, feigning a confusion I did not feel. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, clarifying adrenaline. This was it. This was the moment of truth I had come for, though I hadn't anticipated it would be this nakedly brutal. "What? Honey, what's wrong? Did I say something?" "I said, get out of the car," she repeated, her voice harder this time, each word a chip of ice. Paul stood behind her, a silent, hulking shadow, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture of belligerent finality. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was a coward, content to let his wife do the dirty work. Noah, my sweet boy, started to cry softly, a heartbreaking whimpering sound. "Mommy, no, don't make Grandma get out." "Hush, Noah," Melissa snapped, without a flicker of hesitation, her eyes still fixed on the woods. "This doesn't concern you." I slowly, deliberately began to gather my purse. My movements were measured, unhurried. I was keenly aware of the phone inside, still recording. I needed to capture all of this. "Melissa, let's not be hasty," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable, the voice of the adult in the situation. "It's cold and wet. We can talk about this when we've all calmed down." "There's nothing to talk about," she sneered, finally turning her cold eyes on me. "You wanted to know how we felt? This is how we feel. You're a burden, Mom. You always have been. You and your money and your constant judgment. You come into our lives and you cause problems. You interfere." She reached in and grabbed my upper arm, her fingers digging into my skin with surprising strength. It was a shocking, aggressive gesture that crossed a line I never thought she would cross. "Out, now." I allowed her to pull me from the car, stumbling slightly on the loose, wet gravel. I stood there, a 68-year-old woman in a light cardigan and comfortable walking shoes, utterly alone in the cold Washington mist. My luggage, with my change of clothes, and more importantly, my daily heart medication, was still in the trunk. My return flight ticket was in the side pocket of that suitcase. They were leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the purse in my hand. I looked at the car, at the faces of my grandchildren pressed against the rain-streaked window. Emma's mouth was open in a silent scream of protest, tears streaming down her small face. Noah was sobbing openly now, his little body shaking. That was the image that burned itself into my memory, the image that would fuel my resolve in the days to come.
The faces of my grandchildren, trapped and helpless witnesses to their parents' cruelty. Paul moved to the driver's side without a word. He still wouldn't look at me. Melissa leaned in close, her breath smelling faintly of coffee and malice. She whispered, the words a venomous hiss meant only for me. Maybe this will teach you what family really means. It means staying out of things that aren't your business. It means knowing your place. Maybe a little time alone will help you reflect on that. And with that, she got back in the car, slamming the door shut with a sound of absolute finality. The engine roared to life. I didn't plead. I didn't cry out. I didn't give them the satisfaction. I just stood there, my purse clutched in my hand, and watched as the SUV pulled away, spraying gravel from its tires. I watched it merge back onto the highway and disappear into the mist, taking my grandchildren and my last shred of hope for my daughter with it. For a full minute, I didn't move. The silence was profound, broken only by the dripping of water from the tall, silent pines and the distant, mournful hum of traffic. The cold began to seep into my bones, a damp, invasive chill. A wave of grief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over me. This was my child, my baby girl, whom I rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose art projects I had taped to the refrigerator. How had she become this cold, cruel stranger? But grief is a luxury, and I couldn't afford it. Not now. The shock receded, and the cold resolve I had nurtured for weeks settled back into place, harder and more absolute than before. They thought they had left a helpless old woman to panic and despair. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I walked on steady legs towards the bleak restroom building. The first step of their plan was complete. Now the first step of mine would begin. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were stiff from cold, but they didn't tremble. I stopped the recording and saved the file, labeling it evidence. Then I ignored the missed calls from my friends at the retirement community. I ignored the weather app telling me the temperature was dropping into the 40s. I opened my call log and pressed the name at the top of the list. It rang twice before a familiar, no-nonsense voice answered. "Patricia, it's Eleanor," I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant to my ears. "I'm in trouble, and I'm going to need your help." The call to my sister was the easy part. The next call, the one I would make after she was on her way, would be to Davis. The game had begun, and they had just made their opening move. It was a foolish, arrogant one. They had left the queen unprotected, not realizing she was the most powerful piece on the board. The 3-hour drive from Portland to the mountain pass where I was stranded felt like an eternity. I spent it in the small, greasy office of the gas station that adjoined the rest stop. The young man who worked there, a kind soul named Jake, with elaborate tattoos snaking up his arms and surprisingly worried eyes, had taken one look at my pale face and the fact that I was shivering in a thin cardigan and insisted I come inside out of the relentless rain. He made me a cup of lukewarm coffee in a styrofoam cup, which I held with both hands for warmth, and let me sit on a wobbly stool behind the counter, mostly leaving me to my thoughts. "My sister is on her way," I told him, my voice still shaky. He just nodded. "You just wait here as long as you need, ma'am. No trouble at all." His simple, unquestioning kindness was a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty of my own family, and it almost broke me. While I waited, a notification lit up my phone screen. It was an alert from my credit card company. My heart lurched, thinking it was a fraud alert. It was, but not the kind I expected. "Thank you for your purchase of $1,249.99 at the Bellevue Galleria." I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. Bellevue. That was a wealthy suburb of Seattle, in the opposite direction of their home in Portland. They weren't just driving away. They were on a trip, a celebratory shopping spree, with my money, while I was stranded without my heart medication on the side of a mountain. The sheer brazen cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was one thing to abandon me in a fit of anger. It was another to immediately go and spend my money so frivolously, so joyfully. It was a victory lap. Any lingering pain I felt over my daughter's actions was cauterized by a hot, white flash of anger. This was no longer just about getting my money back. This was about justice. This was about ensuring they never did this to anyone ever again.
When my sister Patricia's old, reliable sedan finally pulled up, I nearly collapsed with relief. She burst out of the car, her face a storm of fury and concern. Patricia, my younger sister by 5 years, had always been the fiery one, the protector. Where I was calm and measured, she was passionate and outspoken. She saw the world in black and white, while I was always getting lost in the shades of gray. "Eleanor," she cried, wrapping me in a fierce, bone-crushing hug. "Are you all right? I swear to God, I'm going to kill her. I'm going to drive to her house and wring her selfish little neck with my bare hands." I leaned against her, the first moment I'd allowed myself to feel weak, to feel the full weight of the day's events. "I'm okay, Patty. Just cold. So very cold." She helped me into the car, blasting the heat, and wrapping an old, scratchy wool blanket from the back seat around my shoulders. She didn't press me for details right away, just drove, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were bone white. She navigated the winding mountain roads with a focused rage. After a few miles of blessed, warm silence, she finally spoke, her voice thick with an emotion I knew well. It was the righteous anger she reserved for people who hurt those she loved. "I told you, didn't I? For years I told you. Ever since she married that lazy, good-for-nothing Paul. I told you she was only after your money." I looked out at the passing trees, their dark, imposing shapes a blur in the rain. "I know you did. But you never listened. It was always, 'She's my daughter, Patty. She just needs a little help. She has a good heart.' You always made excuses for her, even after she forgot your 65th birthday because they had concert tickets planned, even after she didn't show up for Uncle Robert's funeral, her own uncle, because they had a non-refundable weekend getaway planned. A good heart. Eleanor, her heart is a lump of coal." Every word was true. And every word was a small twist of the knife, not from her, but from my own past foolishness. I had defended Melissa against Patricia's accusations for years, always hoping, always believing that the sweet little girl I'd raised was still in there somewhere. I had chosen to be blind because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. "I'm sorry," I said softly, the admission costing me a great deal of pride. "You were right about everything." Seeing my utter defeat, my complete surrender of a lifetime of maternal hope, Patricia's anger softened, replaced by a deep, sisterly sympathy. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Oh, Elle, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to say I told you so. I'm just so angry for you. That you have to go through this. No mother deserves this." That's when I knew I could trust her completely. The recriminations were over. We were a team now. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth from the car's heater slowly seep into my chilled bones. That's why I have to do this, Patty. And I can't do it alone. I pulled out my phone and showed her the credit card alert from the Bellevue Galleria. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "That little witch!" she gasped. Then I went to my audio files and pressed play on the file labeled Evidence. The car filled with the sound of the argument from earlier that day. My meek, questioning voice, Melissa's shrill, angry denials, her slip of the tongue about Paul's promotion, Paul's grunts of assent. Patricia listened, her expression growing darker and more resolute with every word. When the recording ended, she was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the wet road ahead. "You knew," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "You knew they were planning something. That's why you recorded it." "I knew they were lying. I didn't know they would do this.
but I knew I needed proof that I wasn't just a confused old woman making things up. I needed their own words to fight them with. Patricia turned to look at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of awe in her eyes. It was the look she used to give me when we were children, and I'd helped her with her difficult math homework. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, all traces of hot anger replaced with cold determination. "What's the plan? First, we go to your place. I need a hot bath and a very large glass of wine. Then," I pulled up Davis's number on my phone, "we call our lawyer, we tell him the game has started, and we tell him to prepare the opening move." Patricia nodded, a grim, satisfied smile on her face. "It's about time someone taught that girl a lesson about family, and it looks like her mother is going to be the one to do it." The reluctant ally was gone. In her place sat my sister, my partner in crime, ready for war. The days that followed were a blur of quiet planning and simmering resolve, a strange interlude of calm before the inevitable storm. I stayed with Patricia in her cozy, cluttered Portland bungalow, a world away from the cold, modern emptiness of Melissa's house. Here, the floors creaked with history, the air smelled of old books and fresh coffee, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Our first official act of war was the call to Davis. We put him on speakerphone in Patricia's living room. I explained the situation in a calm, factual tone, from the abandonment and a stolen medication to the fraudulent credit card charges. I emailed him the audio file while we spoke. He listened without interruption, his silence a comforting professional presence. When I finished, there was a long pause on his end. "Eleanor, this is worse than we thought," he said, finally, his voice grave and devoid of any warmth. This was Davis the lawyer, not Davis the old friend. "This goes beyond a simple contract dispute. This is felony elder abuse, criminal abandonment, financial exploitation." "I know," I said. "So what do we do?" "We proceed with caution and overwhelming force," he replied, and I could almost hear him ticking off a list in his head. "The lien is our endgame, our checkmate. But before we use it, we need to build an absolutely airtight case. We need to document everything. First thing tomorrow, I want you to go with Patricia to the local police precinct and file a report about the abandonment and the stolen medication. It's crucial to have this on record. Next, I want you to call your credit card company and report every single one of those fraudulent charges. And," he added, his voice hardening, "I think it's time we brought in someone else. I have a private investigator I trust implicitly. Her name is Maria Sterling. She's a former police detective, discreet, thorough, and absolutely relentless. I want her to dig into Melissa and Paul's finances. All of it. We need to know the full scope of what we're dealing with." I agreed without a moment's hesitation. This was no longer just my personal fight. It was a legal battle, and I needed an army. The next day, Patricia drove me to the police station. It was a humiliating, soul-crushing experience. I sat there under the flat, buzzing fluorescent lights, telling a young, impassioned officer with a bored expression that my own daughter had left me for dead. He took the report, but his eyes held a flicker of skepticism. I could see him thinking, another messy family squabble. It strengthened my resolve. I would not be dismissed as a hysterical, confused old woman. I would be heard.
Meeting Maria Sterling was a different experience entirely. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and an air of quiet competence that immediately put me at ease. We met in Davis's stately, wood-paneled office. She didn't offer pity or platitudes, only a pen and a fresh legal pad. "Tell me everything, Mrs. Wilson," she said, her voice low and direct. "No detail is too small. Names, Dates, conversations you overheard, odd financial requests, feelings of unease you dismissed. Anything. And so I did. With Patricia's help chiming in to jog my memory, I recounted years of small slights and suspicious behaviors that, in isolation, had seemed like mere character flaws, but when strung together, formed a disturbing tapestry of deceit. The time Melissa needed $5,000 for a down payment on a more reliable car for the kids, but no new car ever appeared. The time Paul mentioned a bad investment in a tech startup and needed help covering their mortgage for a few months, only to be seen wearing a new Rolex a month later. I told her about other relatives. My cousin Carol, whose husband had recently passed away from a sudden heart attack, had mentioned in a phone call how wonderfully helpful Melissa had been in sorting out his complicated financial papers. My brother-in-law, a trusting, good-natured man, had complained at a family barbecue that Paul had given him a hot stock tip that ended up costing him nearly his entire retirement savings. I always thought it was just Melissa being Melissa, I confessed, the words tasting like failure. Irresponsible, a little selfish. I never thought it was a pattern. I never thought it was malicious. The worst deceptions are the ones hidden in plain sight, Mrs. Wilson, Sterling said, her pen flying across the page. People don't want to see the bad in their own family. It's easier to make excuses. For the next week, Sterling worked in the shadows. She was a ghost, digging through public records, financial statements, and social media with a surgical precision. She discovered that the bad investment Paul had gotten my brother-in-law into was a shell company registered in his own name. She found out that after helping my recently widowed and grieving cousin Carol, several $1,000s had been transferred from Carol's account to pay off a credit card Paul used exclusively for online gambling. It was a systematic, grubby pattern of preying on family members during their most vulnerable moments: grief, financial hardship, old age. They weren't master criminals, they were parasites, moving from one trusting host to another. The $75,000 I'd given them wasn't their first big score, it was just their most audacious. While Sterling gathered the ammunition, I took care of another piece of business. I called the admissions office of the community college where I'd once dreamed of taking art history classes. I re-enrolled for the fall semester. It was a small act of defiance, but it was for me. It was a declaration that my life was not over. It was not defined by my daughter's betrayal. I was reclaiming my future, one small, hopeful piece at a time. The call from Sterling came late one evening while Patricia and I were washing the dinner dishes. "I have something, Eleanor," she said, her voice tight with a controlled anger I was coming to recognize. "It's about the kids' college funds." My blood ran cold. I gripped the edge of the sink. "What about them?" "They're empty. Melissa and Paul liquidated both accounts 6 months ago. Over $30,000 gone." I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone feeling heavy as a lead weight in my hand. The money I had so carefully, so lovingly put away for Emma and Noah's education since the day they were born. The money I had earmarked for their future, for their dreams, for their escape. It was gone, spent on a new kitchen, a fancy car, and a gambling addiction. That was the final straw. That was the point of no return. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had stolen from their own children. I said, my voice dangerously quiet, when I called my lawyer moments later. "Davis, it's time. Send the notice. Enforce the lien. Take the house." The quiet investigation was over. It was time for the war to begin.
The official notice of lien enforcement, delivered by a grim-faced court courier to their front door on a Tuesday morning, hit Melissa and Paul like a physical blow. The legal document, cold, formal, and utterly uncompromising, informed them that due to the default on their $75,000 loan agreement, foreclosure proceedings were being initiated on their property at 125 Aspen Drive. They had 30 days to repay the full amount, plus interest and legal fees, or the house would be seized and sold at public auction. Their reaction was not one of remorse or shame or even a desire to negotiate. It was one of pure, panicked, narcissistic fury. They had grossly, fatally underestimated me. They had cast me in the role of the dotty, forgetful old woman, and they had come to believe their own fiction. They assumed I would be too ashamed, too broken, or too weak to fight back. They thought I could simply ignore me until I faded away, a distant, unpleasant memory. Now, the helpless old woman was threatening to take away their most prized possession, not just a house, but the very symbol of the upper-middle-class life they had lied and stolen to create. Their first move was a barrage of hysterical phone calls, not to me, I had blocked their numbers weeks ago, but to Patricia. "She can't do this!" Melissa shrieked into the phone, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "It's our house! The kids live here! Has she gone completely insane? You have to talk to her, Aunt Patty! You have to make her stop this madness!" Patricia, who had been waiting for this call, was as cool as a cucumber. She let Melissa rant for a full 2 minutes before calmly replying, "Melissa, you should have thought about your kids and their house when you left their grandmother stranded on a mountain without her heart medication. This is between you and your lawyer now. Don't call me again." And she hung up. When bullying didn't work, they moved on to a more insidious and, frankly, more predictable tactic. They decided to paint me as mentally incompetent. It was a classic, despicable move. The last refuge of the cornered abuser, discredit the victim. Their lawyer, a slick-looking man named Slater, whose face I later saw on a billboard advertising aggressive divorce representation, filed a petition for an emergency conservatorship over my person and my estate. In it, they alleged that I, Eleanor Wilson, was suffering from advanced dementia and paranoid delusions. They claimed I was being manipulated by my opportunistic and vindictive sister. They described my actions, demanding repayment of a legitimate loan, enforcing a legal lien, as prima facie proof of my mental instability. They were trying to strip me of my legal rights, to gain control over my assets, and to nullify the very contract that threatened their comfortable life. "This is good," Davis said calmly when he forwarded me the court filing, his voice betraying not a hint of alarm. "Good?" I asked, my stomach churning as I read the vicious lies they had written about me, twisting my love into obsession and my prudence into paranoia. He said, "Let them," he replied, with a hint of steel in his voice. "They're arrogant, they're predictable, and they're walking right into our trap. They have requested a formal mediation session before the conservatorship hearing. They're hoping a court-appointed mediator will see a poor, concerned family on one side and a confused old woman on the other. They think they can ambush you with sympathy and pressure. In reality, they have just built us the perfect stage to expose them for who they truly are." The strategy became crystal clear. We would agree to the mediation. We would let them walk into that room brimming with misplaced confidence, ready to perform for the mediator. We would let them spin their web of lies, making it as thick and elaborate as they wished. And then, with the full, impartial attention of a legal official, we would burn that web to the ground. But they had one last vile trick up their sleeve, an act of such desperation and cruelty that it solidified any lingering doubts about their character. A few days before the scheduled mediation, a somber-looking woman from Child Protective Services showed up at Patricia's door. Someone, she said, had filed an anonymous complaint, alleging that the children, Emma and Noah, were living in an unstable environment and that their great-aunt, Patricia, was emotionally volatile and unfit to provide proper care. It was a transparent, desperate attempt to intimidate Patricia, my sole source of support, and to isolate me further. They were using their own children as pawns in the most disgusting way imaginable, hoping to create a custody crisis that would force our hand. Patricia, to her immense credit, handled it with grace and dignity. She welcomed the social worker in, offered her a cup of tea, and showed her the clean, loving home. She showed her the children's cheerful, tidy bedrooms, the A-plus report cards taped to the fridge, the photos of them laughing on a recent trip to the zoo. The social worker interviewed Emma and Noah separately. I wasn't present, but Patricia told me later that Emma, my brave, quiet Emma, had told the woman everything. She told her about the trip to the mountain, about how her mommy and daddy had yelled at Grandma and left her by the side of the road. The CPS case was closed within 48 hours, dismissed as unfounded and malicious. But the act itself was another crucial piece of evidence for our collection. It showcased their character, their willingness to harm anyone, even their own children, to get what they wanted. The day before the mediation, my team assembled in Davis's office. Me, Patricia, Davis, and Maria Sterling. Sterling laid out a neat, comprehensive file on the polished mahogany table. It was our arsenal. It contained bank statements, property records, a detailed timeline of their deceit, and sworn affidavits from the other relatives they had swindled. "They have no idea what's coming," Sterling said, with a grim smile. Davis looked at me, his expression serious. "Are you ready for this, Eleanor? You're going to have to face her." I looked at the file, the undeniable black and white proof of their corruption. I thought of my grandchildren's tear-streaked faces in the back of that SUV. I thought of the years of love I had given, only to be repaid with such bottomless contempt. "Ready?" I said, a calm I hadn't felt in months, settling over me like a weighted blanket. "Davis, I've been ready my whole life for this." The mediation room was aggressively neutral, a study in beige and bland functionality. Beige walls, a long, polished table that reflected the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead, and a set of uncomfortable chairs designed to encourage swift resolutions. The air was stale with the ghosts of 1,000 other failed negotiations, broken contracts, and bitter family feuds. It was the perfect, sterile environment for the raw emotional drama that was about to unfold. We arrived first, a deliberate choice by Davis to establish control of the space. My team. I wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress, a string of my late husband's pearls, a gift for our 25th anniversary, around my neck. They felt cool and solid against my skin, a tangible link to his strength and integrity. I felt like a general wearing her dress uniform into a decisive battle. Patricia sat to my right, a silent, solid pillar of support in a sensible blazer. Davis was on my left, his expensive leather briefcase resting on the table, pregnant with the evidence that would be our ammunition. Melissa and Paul arrived a few minutes later with their lawyer, the man from the billboard, Mr. Slater. He had a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Melissa was dressed to play the part of the concerned, heartbroken daughter, wearing a soft, dove-gray sweater set that made her look vulnerable. She had artfully applied dark makeup under her eyes to enhance the look of stress and sleepless nights. It was a masterful performance before she'd ever spoken a word. Paul was a block of resentful silence beside her, his ill-fitting suit doing nothing to hide the hostility radiating from him. They avoided looking at us, taking their seats opposite as if they were strangers they'd been forced to share a table with. The mediator, a woman named Miss Albright, entered last. She was in her 50s, with intelligent, discerning eyes and an air of no-nonsense professionalism that I found immediately reassuring. She was not here to be charmed or manipulated. She was here for the facts. She laid out the ground rules in a crisp, clear voice. Each party would have a chance to speak without interruption. The goal, she stated, was to find common ground and avoid a costly and painful public court battle. Mr. Slater, she turned her neutral gaze to their side of the table, perhaps you'd like to begin. Slater leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, oozing a sincerity that felt oily and false. Thank you, Ms. Albright. My clients, Melissa and Paul Harris, and I are here today out of profound love and concern for their mother, Eleanor. He gestured toward me with a sad, paternalistic air. They have been forced into this terrible, heartbreaking position because of a series of alarming and erratic behaviors on Eleanor's part. He then launched into a carefully constructed and utterly fictional narrative. He painted me as a lonely, grieving widow who, in the wake of her husband's death, had become paranoid and confused. He spoke of my obsession with their finances, my delusions of being taken advantage of, my inability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. The lien on their family home, Slater shook his head, sadly, as if the injustice of it all was too much to bear, was the culmination of this paranoia. A loving gift of financial assistance was twisted in her mind into a weapon. She is not in her right mind, Ms. Albright. We have reason to believe she is heavily manipulated by her sister, Patricia, who records will show has a long history of animosity towards my client, Melissa. He glanced at Patricia, who remained impassive, a statue of righteous indignation. Then it was Melissa's turn to perform. She pulled a tissue from her purse, a well-rehearsed prop, and daubed at her dry eyes. I love my mother, she began, her voice thick with fake emotion. More than anything, all we've ever wanted is to take care of her, to make sure she's safe. But she's not the woman she used to be. She gets confused. She forgets things. The day of the misunderstanding at the rest stop, she was having a terrible episode. She was screaming, saying horrible things, making no sense. We were frightened, for her and for our children, who were in the car. We thought giving her some space to calm down was the kindest thing to do. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap, my breathing even. I let her lies hang in the air, each one more outrageous, more insulting than the last. She was burying herself, shovelful by shovelful, and she didn't even know it. All we want, Melissa finished, looking directly at the mediator with wide, pleading, tear-filled eyes, is to get my mother the help she so desperately needs. We ask, we beg that she dissolve this punitive lien and agree to a full medical evaluation. We want to manage her affairs to protect her from herself and from others who might seek to take advantage of her fragile state.
The room was silent. Miss Albright's face was a mask of professional neutrality. She made a few notes on her legal pad, then turned her calm, intelligent gaze to me. Mrs. Wilson, she said, her voice even, thank you for your patience. I would now like to hear from you. This was it, the moment the entire strategy had been built around. Davis gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table, a quick jolt of strength. I took a sip of water, my hand perfectly steady. I looked across the table, not at the mediator, but directly at my daughter. I let my eyes hold hers for a long, uncomfortable moment until she was the one who flinched and looked away. Then I turned to Miss Albright. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a confused, frail old woman. It was the calm, clear, and confident voice of a teacher who was about to educate her most difficult and disappointing students. Thank you, Miss Albright, I began.
I have listened with great interest to my daughter's version of events. It is a compelling work of fiction, and I must commend her on a truly theatrical performance. Now, if you'll permit me, I would like to present you with the facts. I saw a flicker of unease in Mr. Slater's eyes. Melissa shifted in her chair. Paul just glared, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. The stage was set. It was time to pull back the curtain. My daughter and her counsel have painted a picture of me as a woman who was confused and forgetful. I started, my voice resonating with a quiet authority that seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the sterile room. It is true that I am 68 years old, but with age comes not confusion, but a terrible, piercing clarity. You begin to see things for what they are, without the rosy filter of youthful naivete or the desperate hope of a mother's love. And I see my daughter and my son-in-law for exactly who they are. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Melissa and Paul looked distinctly uncomfortable. Their lawyer, Mr. Slater, had a fixed, plastic smile, but his eyes darted nervously between me and his clients, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. Mrs. Wilson spoke of a misunderstanding at the rest stop. She claims I was having an episode. I have a slightly different recollection of that day, and thankfully, we don't have to rely on my supposedly failing memory to get to the truth. I nodded to Davis. He reached into his briefcase and produced a small, high-quality audio speaker, placing it in the center of the polished table with a soft, definitive click. This is a recording from Mrs. Wilson's cellular phone, made inside my client's vehicle on the day in question, Davis announced in a formal tone. It is time-stamped and has been verified by a forensic audio expert, whose affidavit is available for your review. He pressed a button. The room filled with the sounds from that car, the swish of the wipers, the hum of the engine, and then our voices. My own calm, questioning voice, and then Melissa's, shrill and angry, a stark contrast to the weeping victim she had just portrayed. For God's sake, Mom, are you ever going to let that go? You never trusted us. You sit down there in Arizona on your pile of money from Dad's inheritance, judging us. And then the fatal slip, the unforced error born of pure rage. Asking questions about our salary, about Paul's promotion that he worked so hard for. A sharp, audible intake of breath came from Mr. Slater. Melissa's face went white as a sheet. Paul looked like he'd been physically punched in the gut. The recording continued, capturing her venomous whisper as she abandoned me. Maybe this will teach you what family really means. Davis switched it off, and the silence that followed was heavy and damning. As you can hear, Miss Albright, I said into that silence, my voice still calm, the only person having an episode of uncontrolled anger and admitting to a significant financial lie was my daughter. She seems to have forgotten that her husband's promotion was the very reason she gave for no longer needing financial help, just weeks after taking $75,000 from me under the pretense that he was unemployed and they were facing foreclosure. I let that sink in before moving to the next point. They claim my enforcement of the lien was an act of paranoia, a symptom of my supposed dementia. I call it a prudent business decision. A decision I am very, very glad my lawyer advised me to make. I nodded to Davis again. He opened a thick, red-bound file folder and slid it across the table to the mediator. This, Miss Albright, is a report compiled by a licensed private investigator, Miss Maria Sterling, a former detective with the Portland Police Bureau. I took over the narration, my voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel. Miss Sterling's investigation found a troubling and, frankly, disgusting pattern of behavior. For instance, it seems my son-in-law, Paul, has a rather expensive taste for online gambling. This report contains bank statements showing transfers from a joint account to various offshore betting sites totaling over $15,000 in the last year alone. Paul shot up from his chair, his face crimson. That's a lie. That's an invasion of my privacy. You can't use that. Please sit down, Mr. Harris, the mediator said sternly, her eyes not leaving the report. Your privacy is a matter for a different court. The investigation also uncovered, I went on, my voice like ice, that my daughter helped my recently widowed cousin, Carol, with her late husband's estate. Shortly after her help, 3 separate wire transfers totaling $8,000 were made from my cousin's account to pay off a high-interest credit card. a card that was, curiously enough, in my daughter's name. My cousin, when presented with this information, provided a sworn affidavit, which is also in that file. She believed the money was being invested into a trust for her own children. Melissa was visibly trembling now, staring down at her hands on the table as if they belonged to someone else. "And finally," I said, delivering the killing blow, my voice dropping to a near whisper, heavy with a grief that was all too real, "there is the matter of my grandchildren's college funds. Funds I started for them on the day they were born. Funds that, until 6 months ago, contained over $30,000. Miss Sterling's report includes the liquidation statements from the bank. The accounts are now empty." I leaned forward slightly, forcing Melissa to look at me. "Tell me, Melissa, what kind of a mother steals her own children's future to pay for a kitchen renovation and her husband's gambling debts?" A choked sob escaped Melissa's lips. It was the first genuine sound she had made all day. It was the sound of being caught. Mr. Slater was frantically shuffling his papers, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. He had been completely and utterly blindsided. His entire case, built on a foundation of lies and crocodile tears, had just been demolished brick by brick. I turned my full attention to the mediator, my voice softening with a sadness that was entirely real. "Miss Albright, I did not come here today to be vindictive. I came here for the truth. My daughter and her husband have portrayed me as a senile old woman who needs to be protected from herself. The evidence clearly shows that they are the ones from whom my family, especially my innocent grandchildren, need protection."
I sat back in my chair, the pearls cool against my skin. I am not confused, I am not paranoid, and I am not dropping the lien. That house is the only thing left from which I can recover the money they stole from me, and more importantly, the money they stole from their own children. I am not the one who needs a medical evaluation. They are the ones whose character is profoundly and perhaps pathologically flawed. The curtain had not just risen, it had been torn down. And in the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth, my daughter and son-in-law were exposed for all the world and the law to see. The aftermath in the mediation room was a silent tableau of utter and complete defeat. Melissa sat slumped in her chair, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with dry, pathetic sobs of self-pity, not remorse. Paul stared blankly at the wall, his face a mottled red, the picture of a bully whose bluff had been called and who had no idea what to do next. Their lawyer, Mr. Slater, was pale and sweating, quietly and quickly packing his briefcase as if he wanted to vanish from the room before he was implicated further. He knew he had been made a party to perjury and a conspiracy to commit fraud. His billboard smile was gone, replaced by a grim, tight-lipped terror. Miss Albright, the mediator, closed the red-bound file in front of her with a quiet, decisive snap that echoed in the silent room. She looked at Melissa and Paul with an expression of such profound professional disdain it was more chilling than any outburst of anger could have been. "This mediation is over," she stated, her voice cold and final. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris, not only have you failed to present a single credible piece of evidence to support your petition for conservatorship, but you have been confronted with substantial and corroborated evidence of financial exploitation, fraud, and what appears to be a malicious and vexatious filing with Child Protective Services." She stood up, her authority absolute, a judge and jury in this small, beige room. "I will be recommending to the court that your petition be dismissed with prejudice, meaning you can never file such a claim against your mother again. Furthermore, I am ethically and legally obligated to submit a copy of this entire file, including the investigator's report, the sworn affidavits, and your own testimony here today,
to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal charges. Panic finally broke through Paul's stunned silence. "Now, wait a minute," he blustered, finding his voice at last. "You can't do that. This was a private mediation. This was supposed to be confidential." "You invited the legal system into your family's private life, Mr. Harris. Now you have to live with the consequences. You should have considered that before you attempted to defraud your mother and weaponize your children. You are excused." They stumbled out of the room like disgraced courtiers, banished from the Queen's presence. They were not a conquering couple, but a pair of exposed, grubby criminals. They didn't look at me as they left. They couldn't. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of their actions cascaded down upon them with the swift, unforgiving force of gravity. The district attorney, armed with our meticulously prepared file, moved quickly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Melissa and Paul were charged with multiple counts of financial elder abuse and felony fraud. Their lawyer, eager to distance himself from them, advised them to take a plea bargain rather than face a jury that would surely be composed of people who had aging parents of their own. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution to all the relatives they had swindled, and mandated to attend 500 hours of community service. The house, their castle of lies, was their biggest and most immediate loss. With the foreclosure proceeding unopposed, the property was seized. It sold quickly in the hot Portland real estate market. After the bank took its small original share and Davis's legal fees were paid, I received a check for $95,000. It was more than the original loan, a small compensation for the emotional and financial damages incurred. I didn't keep a penny of it for myself. The first thing I did was fully refund the children's college funds, adding a significant amount from my own savings to make up for lost time and interest. I worked with Davis to place the money into an ironclad trust, with Patricia and myself as co-trustees. No one could touch it until the children turned 18. The rest of the money went to my cousin Carol and my brother-in-law, making them whole again. It was a quiet, private act of justice. The most difficult and painful consequence involved the children. With their parents entangled in legal troubles and their home gone, the family court had to determine custody. Given the evidence of their parents' malicious CPS report and their theft of the college funds, the decision was straightforward. Patricia, to her everlasting credit, stepped up without hesitation and was granted full legal custody of Emma and Noah. The day they moved into Patricia's bungalow was bittersweet. The children were quiet and subdued, their small shoulders burdened with a weight no child should have to carry. Their world had been turned upside down. They had lost their home, and in a very real way, they had lost their parents. But as I watched Patricia show Emma to her new room, which she had painted a cheerful yellow and decorated with posters of horses and stars, I knew this was their best chance at a healthy, stable, and honest future. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel a thirst for revenge. Watching the life my daughter had built on a foundation of lies crumble into dust, I only felt a deep, profound sadness, a sense of waste. All that scheming, all that cruelty, all for a fancy kitchen and a new car. They had traded their family's love and their own integrity for things that could be repossessed. In the end, they were left with nothing but the ashes of their deceit. A year can change everything. The crisp, clean Portland air, smelling of damp earth and pine, felt like a fresh start, a welcome change from the dry, unforgiving heat of the desert I had known for so long. I hadn't returned to Tucson. My life was here now. I had sold my home there, with its memories both happy and painful, and bought a small, bright condominium just a 10-minute walk from Patricia's house. My patio was smaller, but my view was of a lush green park filled with the sound of laughing children instead of the profound silence of the cacti. My days found a new, gentle rhythm, one centered not on loss and betrayal, but on love and rebuilding. 3 days a week, after my morning art history class at the community college, I had finally started it, and it was every bit as wonderful as I dreamed. I would walk over to Patricia's house. I would be there with a plate of fresh-baked cookies or a new puzzle when the school bus dropped Emma and Noah off at the corner. Today, the comforting smell of cinnamon and melting butter filled Patricia's warm, slightly chaotic kitchen. Emma, now a confident 12-year-old, with the first hints of the graceful woman she would become, stood on a stool beside me, carefully and methodically stirring a bowl of cookie dough. She had her father's dark hair, but my late husband's thoughtful and serious eyes. "A little more vanilla, Grandma," she said, her voice serious, a master chef instructing her apprentice. "Like you taught me. It makes the chocolate taste richer." I smiled, handing her the small brown bottle. "You're the boss, chef. You know best."
Noah, at 9, was busy at the kitchen table, meticulously drawing a comic book on a large sketch pad. His was a world of superheroes and villains, of clear-cut good and evil. I suppose, in a way, he was processing what had happened in the only way he knew how. In his stories, the good guys always won, and the bad guys always learned their lesson. I wished reality were so simple. We had been careful, Patricia and I, in how we explained things to them. We never badmouthed their parents. That would only hurt the children more. We simply answered their questions with age-appropriate honesty. We told them their parents had made some very big, very bad choices, had broken important rules that grown-ups have to follow, and needed a long time to try and fix things. They saw Melissa and Paul once a month in supervised visits at a sterile, impersonal family center. The meetings, I was told, were awkward, strained affairs. Melissa often cried, Paul just stared. The connection was frayed, perhaps irreparably. The children were polite, but distant. They were learning to protect their own hearts. Patricia came in from her garden, kicking off her muddy boots by the door. "Smells amazing in here. I hope you saved some of the dough for me." She came over and kissed the top of my head, a casual, loving gesture that had become a part of our new life together. Our bond, forged in the fire of that crisis, was stronger than it had ever been. We were more than sisters now. We were a team. We were a family. Later that evening, after the cookies were eaten, the homework was done, and the children were tucked into bed, I sat on the porch swing with Patricia, cups of chamomile tea warming our hands against the evening chill. "She called today," Patricia said quietly, her voice neutral. I didn't have to ask who she was. "What did she want?" "The usual," Patricia sighed, crying, saying she's sorry, that she's changed, asking if maybe the kids could come for an unsupervised visit. For Thanksgiving. I looked out at the darkening street where the first stars were beginning to prick the deep blue sky. A familiar ache bloomed in my chest. Some wounds, I was learning, never fully heal. They just become a part of who you are. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that trust is like a vase, Melissa," Patricia recounted, her voice firm. "Once it's shattered into a million pieces, you can try to glue it back together, but it will never hold water again. And right now, she has to earn back one small, tiny piece at a time. Thanksgiving is not one of those pieces." I nodded, grateful for my sister's strength, for her ability to draw the hard lines that I sometimes struggled with. Emma's question from a few weeks ago echoed in my mind. We had been planting tulips in the front yard when she looked up at me, her face smudged with dirt, and asked me, "Grandma, why did Mommy and Daddy do that?" I had stopped digging, my heart clenching. I had pulled her into a hug, the scent of her shampoo and the damp earth filling my senses. "Sometimes, sweetie," I had whispered into her hair, "people get lost.
They get scared and they get greedy, and they start to believe that the things they have are more important than the people they love. They forget what truly matters. I pulled back to look into her earnest, searching eyes. The important thing is that we know what matters. You and me and Aunt Patty and Noah, and we'll always be here to help you find your way if you ever feel lost. Now, sitting on the porch, I knew that was the real lesson. The true inheritance I could give them wasn't money in a trust fund, but a compass of character, a foundation of honesty, integrity, and resilience. The pain of my daughter's betrayal is a scar I will carry forever, but it is not a source of shame. It is a reminder. It taught me that love has to have boundaries, and kindness must be paired with strength. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot let others drain you of your self-worth. Standing up for yourself isn't an act of aggression, it's an act of self-preservation. It's how you teach the world, and sometimes even your own family, how you deserve to be treated. My name is Eleanor Wilson. I am 68 years old, and I learned that true family isn't built on obligation or blood, but on a foundation of respect, truth, and unwavering love. And that is a home that no one can put a lien on and no one can ever take away. Thank you for listening to my journey. This story has been hard to tell, but it feels important to share. Has anything like this ever touched your life? Have you ever felt your sacrifices were taken for granted or had to fight to reclaim your own value? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter and your voices deserve to be heard.